This building was voted the ugliest in Stockholm in 2022. It's not hard to see why. To the common observer, this neo-brutalist block is grey, dull and depressing. It gets even more depressing when you realize that this building belongs to the Stockholm School of Architecture. Just what is going on with the architecture profession? How do you go from buildings like the Stockholm City Hall to whatever the hell this is? How come so many contemporary buildings are so soulless, ugly and depressing? Will we ever be able to bring back beauty into architecture? Let's find out. It has been said that there are no such things as ugly buildings, only buildings that are interesting in different ways. I disagree. To me and many others, lots of modern buildings are indeed extremely ugly. To be clear, we're talking about buildings that were the result of an actual, meaningful architectural design process, not just any random structure with a roof on it. But even if a building is perceived to be ugly, dull or depressing by the public eye, it can still have a ton of architectural value because, as the argument goes, sometimes you need a trained eye to appreciate beauty in a building, like architects or similar professionals. However, the idea that we need to have a formal education to find our built environment pleasant or interesting is both harmful and dangerous in my opinion. Clearly, there is a divide between architects and the general public. However, criticizing modern buildings carries some relevant modern-day risks. We live in an era of populism and far-right anti-intellectualism. Some of the worst people out there are more than happy to brand every professional field as some stupid, out-of-touch, ivory tower circle jerk which quote-unquote normal people do not need or want. For many, this includes architecture. But the far-right types point at modern buildings not as examples of casual ugliness or of the architect-everyman divide, but of progressive degeneracy, part of some plot against Western civilization or something. So if you raise your voice against ugly, modern buildings, be careful, you might just find yourself in bad company. Wow, many of these modern buildings sure look soulless and ugly.
Yes, I agree with you completely. Modern buildings are indeed degenerate, disgusting affronts to humanity, designed to poison the heart of Western civilization. It is really just a cynical ploy by the quote-unquote elites to demoralize us and prepare us for the woke progressive final solution.
Well, I don't know about that, but it sure would be nice to have some nice-looking buildings again.
We're in complete agreement once more. We do need to return to our glorious past to stem the tide of postmodernist Marxist cultural degeneracy designed to break the spirit of white civilization to prepare the white race for the great replacement. Really, we should not rest until every building is covered by statues of muscular, frowning white people to show these triple parentheses elites that white civilization will not go down without a fight.
Well, at least we agree that modern buildings are kinda not nice. Right, so we should be careful not to let the far-right insert itself into the discussion on architectural beauty. Everyday people just want friendlier, better-looking architecture, while the far-right keeps raving about some secret infinity war against Jews or something. Reality is far more banal than that, however. For example, many of the ugly buildings in Europe today were built around the post-war period, where a large chunk of the housing stock got bombed out, so governments had to build as much as they could, as fast as they could, while not exactly swimming in cash to do so. But they could still have managed their finances better. If you ever find yourself in a situation of having to construct millions of residential units on a limited budget in post-war Europe, I know, right? Happens to me every time. Or if you just want to organize, optimize, and get a better view of your finances, you can do so easily with the application of today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money helps manage your finances by giving you a clear overview of them. You can set up budgets for your expenses each month to keep organized. For me personally, this is a welcome improvement over the usual Excel sheets. I can use Rocket Money to review all my monthly subscriptions and cancel those I no longer want. We're talking Netflix, random Patreon subs, site memberships I never use, a very useful feature. And for my US viewers especially, Rocket Money also keeps track of your credit score and helps improving it so you won't get any nasty surprises when you need to borrow money. They can also negotiate your bills and see if there are better offers available so you don't have to call or email each company one by one. The average Rocket Money user saves up to $740 per year on average. Join over 5 million members using Rocket Money to save more and spend less. Go to rocketmoney.com/AdamSomething or click the link in the description below to get started for free or to get even more features with an optional premium plan. That's rocketmoney.com/AdamSomething to get started for free. Thank you for checking out Rocket Money. There is no conspiracy behind ugly buildings. Once again, we aren't talking about individual comic blocks or other post-war housing for the reasons I've mentioned before. We also aren't talking about big box stores and the like at the edges of cities. Due to their car-centric planning, people won't be strolling past them, marveling at the nice facade. They'll just scurry in and out across the parking lot, looking at their shopping carts, the road markings, and their vehicles' dashboards instead of the building itself. Thus, architects, if one is even involved there, won't bother designing something nice, because why would they? What we are talking about is new, architect-designed buildings being put up on the inside of our cities, where, especially in Nordic countries, there seems to be an abundance of new buildings loved by architects but perceived to be ugly by the public eye. One of the reasons for the existence of such buildings is that at this point, architects and regular people tend to look for value in different aspects of a building. That's how you end up with whatever this is. This building might be interesting and valuable to architecture nerds or someone with an architecture degree, but chances are everyone else will find it strange and ugly. It's like if someone is really into ships, let's say. So when they look at this picture, they see a beautiful Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser with a respectable 9,600-ton displacement powered by 4 GE LM2500 gas turbine engines, and isn't that just the coolest friggin' thing in the world? While for the rest of us, it's just some random warship. And this divide between the general public versus professionals and enthusiasts is fine when it comes to stuff like this. After all, warships generally do not affect the life of the average person.
I'm completely and mentally stable. Oh, hey, look, a civilian airliner.
With buildings, though, the story is different. Cities are supposed to be pleasant spaces for public congregation, but if they are filled with buildings that only architects and nerds consider cool or interesting, then we definitely took a wrong turn somewhere. You know, this building is great, you're just too stupid to see it, said the one person liking it to the other 10,000 who don't. But what makes a building feel cold and depressing like this modern block? On the contrary, what makes a building like this inn feel friendly and inviting? Consider the following example. This is the Berlin Castle in 1900. Here it is again in 2023. And here it is in 1976. It got destroyed during World War II, so Soviets built the Palace of the Republic in its place. But in the end, the city of Berlin decided to demolish it and rebuild the original. And the contrast between the two buildings is an excellent case study of human-scale architecture. Both the Soviet and the original buildings were political status symbols, one by the German Empire and the other by the Russian Empire, back then calling itself the Soviet Union. They were architectural power moves essentially, designed to tower over you, to exude an aura of wealth, power and prominence. And yet, the original Berlin Castle is still fundamentally human. If you stand in front of it, sure it's big and imposing, but it's not inhuman or overwhelming. The facade is still made of smaller, human-scale motifs we all relate to, like the windows, the trim, and all sorts of other small, human details. Its environment is also designed for human use. It's calm, walkable, and made up of small human details such as cobblestones, bike racks, and little patches of green. The Palace of the Republic, in comparison, is a large, cold monolith that dwarfs the observer on purpose. There are no relatable elements on its mass-produced facade, and its stern, repetitive pattern just looms over you like the East German Secret Service when they suspected you of listening to Radio Free Europe secretly in your attic. It's also very car-centric, placing the observer on a narrow sidewalk in front of a giant sea of asphalt filled with cars. The presence of smaller, human-scale, relatable elements on a building is key in making them pleasant and good-looking for the average person. That and the adjacent greenery and surroundings that were designed for people instead of cars. It's also important to create them using materials other than low-quality petrochemical products. On top of human scale comes ornamentation, like with this building in Poland. Everyone likes ornamentation as long as it's not tacky, because ornaments themselves, or at least their placement, is the result of a fundamentally human creative process. Or at least it feels like that, as opposed to other trendy facades that look like they were generated by an algorithm. It's like hanging an AI-generated image on the wall versus a photo or painting from an actual artist. The art made by the algorithm is fundamentally empty and inhuman, while the art made by a human has an actual purpose and artistic intent behind its making. Looking at a piece of art by humans or building ornamentation arranged by humans is basically a social experience by proxy. Images generated by AI and buildings that look like they were generated by AI lack this fundamental human aspect. This is why modern buildings feel so soulless, cold and inhuman, while older, traditionally built and ornamented buildings are more friendly, inviting and or inspiring. A great example here is the center of Dresden, where, despite their looks, pretty much every building is brand new. It's one big restoration project to rebuild the center lost during World War II. And people love it. It's pretty much the best place to be in Dresden. Compare that to a newly built residential area designed around cars and developers' bottom line, or to centrally planned Soviet-era neighborhoods. Due to its human scale and characteristics, the old town is a place to be, while the Soviet and modern neighborhoods are places to leave to spend time in the old town. Ideally though, every area built for human habitation should be a place to be. They should be destinations on their own, just like the old towns. They should all be friendly, inviting lighting, and human scale. Nowadays, entire planned and designed neighborhoods can feel unpleasant, cold, overwhelming, inhuman even, as if you're walking through not a place built for people, but a life-sized diorama, a bizarre, dystopian architectural Potemkin village. A positive example here is Cul-de-sac Tempe, a newly built, human-scale, car-free neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, of all places. Here, despite buildings having little to no ornamentation, their human-scale size and arrangement instantly make this neighborhood far nicer to live in compared to its contemporaries. Clearly, the people who designed this took the effort to design streets that feel nice and friendly. From here on, to reproduce those traditional, beautiful, and now hellishly expensive old neighborhoods, all you need is some extra details, some decoration, and some patina. But this already is a great start. This project, not being car-centric or oversized, is already half the battle. Speaking of oversized, another problem is architectural gigantism, when an enormous, standout building or complex is slapped in the middle of the urban fabric. This can happen because architecture as a profession often incentivizes massive, bombastic designs to be looked at from a bird's-eye perspective as a way to gain professional visibility and get ahead. Imagine having 10 acres of vacant land to work with inside a city. As an architect, you could design an organic, neatly fitting neighborhood that blends with the urban fabric, like the one we just looked at. But if you want fame and recognition, you're often better off designing something that's a mix between the Tower of Sauron and the futuristic dildo. Yet another issue is the revolutionary sci-fi material called renderite. It's a type of material on renders that seems to have carbon nanotube levels of strength and is always pristine and beautiful regardless of heavy use or environmental conditions. It also seems to be infinitely flexible and can be formed into impossible shapes without any structural issues. The problem is, such renderite 3D models will never be able to reproduce what the building or neighborhood will feel like after it is built. That's why projects can look beautiful and stunning on renders, but feel unpleasant, empty, overwhelming, and hostile in real life. Architectural Uprising, a movement against ugly buildings from Sweden, has a whole section on their website about so-called fake views, a term they coined about the discrepancy between buildings' renders and how they end up looking in real life. And it's pretty depressing. How people will experience a building in real life does not seem to be a priority for many, if not most, projects. The focus is on the observer from above or from a distance, not on the user on the ground up close. This is where the grievances with contemporary architecture intersect with this anti-establishment wave societies around the world are going through, where people feel like decisions are being made above their heads by nameless, faceless technocrats, and that their voices and democratic will do not matter either way as their standard of living steadily declines. It's not hard to see the parallel with buildings. A new project gets built, and all the buildings are once again these soulless, depressing, trendy fucking cubes which were designed and approved by nameless, faceless investors without any public participation. The end result is a city steadily made uglier. Architects and decision makers should make an effort to reconnect with the general public and go from "this project is great, you're just too uneducated to see it" towards "let's design something we both find interesting, appealing, and useful." During this anti-establishment wave sweeping our societies, it is important to wrest the beautiful architecture narrative away from the far right and make it a common sense type issue instead. The reason we want to see more conventional beauty in architecture is not because we're fighting some global cultural Bolshevist death battle, but because it's nice to live in an area that feels pleasant to be in. Right, I suppose that's the note I'd like to end on. This video was a bit more eclectic than usual, I have to admit. Beauty in architecture is an increasingly relevant topic, risky even, and in my estimation, it's bound to become yet another victim of the culture war. It's also a complex topic, and I'm neither an architect nor an enthusiast, and can only comment on it from a layman perspective. But since our cities are 99% populated and used by lay people, we should take into account their viewpoint instead of simply labeling them uneducated. Ignoring their opinion for too long or dismissing it as uneducated nonsense will only produce an inevitable backlash which no one wants or needs. The danger here is drifting into anti-intellectualism and rejecting experts universally. What if 99% of people in an area want to bring back witch trials or blood libel charges based on hearsay? Oftentimes, navigating between the popular will and expert opinion is a difficult balancing act. In the case of beauty in architecture, however, I think we can safely say that we are due for a realignment in favor of the popular will.